Lynn, Royal Court, an Infinities Breach short story by A.H. Emerson. Lynn's arrival to the small, lush, unnamed planet deep within the Triangulum galaxy was a smooth one. She scanned the planet before landing and sent all information to her headquarters through her communicator. This is a small piece of equipment with access to the largest and most complicated computer ever conceived. Information of the planet was processed and returned to her almost immediately, despite being an incredibly long way away from the hub. The program, Sun, found the ancient remains of a colony ship, which clearly showed signs of a crash landing on the planet. Due to her own history with colony ships and their resulting empire, she eagerly landed on the soft earth of the newer planet. Camouflaging her ship with the large indigenous plants, she made her way to one of the smaller settlements on the outskirts of what appeared to be the largest localized population on the planet. No communication methods were open to her ship. There was no one with technology to notice it, so she knew it was safe in the random, uncultivated field that she left it in. Figuring that keeping her alien status a secret was a must, Lynn simply observed life in the town she wandered into. No one bothered her since she did not signal her ignorance to their culture. Their language was recognizable to Lynn, but she needed to learn the deep accent and unique slang the nascent population had developed. It took weeks until Lynn found someone who was not angry at everyone else. After Lynn witnessed a man openly sexually harass a young waitress, she got up on reflex and punched the guy in the face. The hit dazed him, but he soon rose to his feet and they fought, while the waitress cussed her out for interfering, despite her clear opposition to the harassment. Lynn accepted her defeat as more and more joined in on his side of the fight, forcing her to slowly make her way back to the ship to eat something. She hobbled away because she was beat up bad from her foolish reaction to something that did not sit right with her. Lynn's knees locked up and she fell to the ground. She had been in too many fights since her arrival. A young lady, who also worked at the tavern Lynn just left, put her hand on Lynn's shoulder, and without saying a word, she helped Lynn to her feet. Lynn recognized the uniform, but she had never seen the woman before. Lynn allowed herself to be led by the woman, and after walking about a mile through the gridless streets, they came to a stop in front of a quaint home, just outside the main throng of buildings. Inside it was warm and inviting, two things Lynn had not experienced in a long time. Lynn sat in a big chair and started to converse with the young woman. They became quick friends, and Lynn told her everything within days of knowing one another. Lynn moved in, but continued her odd jobs to help support her new friend. As warm and kind as the woman was to Lynn, she was the opposite at her work or in public, and Lynn concluded that there were more people here who were secretly kind than just her new friend. This gave Lynn many ideas of crazy schemes they could undertake to try and change the society. They landed on a wild plan to infiltrate the palace of ruling monarchs as servants and see how far the culture of cruelty of the small planet's sentient inhabitants ran.
I'm not cleaning chamber pots,
Lynn's friend Pauline claimed while they finalized their plans.
I agree with that sentiment, but we must stick together,
Lynn added, assuring Pauline that is what was most important.
Personal maids probably don't interact much because they are always needed by the royal court,
Pauline reasoned. She slumped into her chair farther.
Unless we were assigned the same family member, then we would never be apart.
Pauline's reaction gave away how much the prospect of the charade excited her. Lynn laughed softly in response to her overzealous nature. Lynn tried her best not to let her well-developed, cynical outlook dim Pauline's life.
That's way too unlikely. I think we should go for kitchen staff. I can cook well.
Lynn considered that out of everything there was to do in a palace, cooking all the time was the least unfortunate task to do.
I cook for the tavern sometimes, so I could try out too.
Pauline was clearly excited for the idea, but Lynn needed to break her rule about not upsetting her.
The food in the tavern is terrible,
Lynn rushed to finish when she saw Pauline's smile fall away.
Better than cooking for myself with no stove, though.
Then teach me!
Pauline's tone bounced right back.
The skill for me is more a product of necessity through my many years, rather than a braggable trait.
Lynn floundered as she realized she knew nothing of this world's food herself.
I'll grab a bunch of stuff from the market tomorrow, and we'll figure everything out together. Then, I'm sure we'll pass the test to cook for the royals.
It was as if Pauline had read Lynn's mind, and Lynn gave her a large smile.
We got this. You're right.
Pauline came home with the oddest assortment of vegetables, spices, and meats Lynn had ever seen. It took them the entire night to identify them in the few cookbooks available. They were obtained at a small library. Apparently, all books were owned by the crown here, and they were strictly monitored. Checking them out was allowed, though, and they studied together through the night by the small fire at the back of the house. After they both woke up late the next day was when the actual cooking started. The kitchen was a disaster. Food was everywhere, and at all varying temperatures. Lynn casted small preservation enchantments on the bowls once the food soaked into the wood a bit, in order to hold the enchantment well. This was Pauline's favorite part, and Lynn made it a spectacle for her sake, even though the flare added nothing to the casting of the spell whatsoever. They concluded, well into the next day, that they had figured at least one way to cook and one fact about each type of food they encountered. Lynn's general knowledge came in handy a fair amount, and that built up her confidence. They distributed the food around the town to those clearly homeless and in need of a meal. The enchantments and the coverings preserved the food perfectly at a warm temperature, so when found, they were noticeably fresh. They knew their food was not the best, but it was unanimously decided that the food was not to be wasted. Lynn was able to deliver hers all by stealth in a timely manner, and was surprised to find that Pauline was already at the dwelling.
How did you beat me back?
Lynn laughed as she entered. She then noticed Pauline was shaken up a bit, and she was sweaty. Her hair was slightly ruffled, and her jacket was ripped a small amount at the sleeve's shoulder seam.
What happened?
Lynn hurried over to her and indicated to the ripped sleeve. To her relief, Pauline laughed, nervously before speaking.
Just one-stop shopping, I guess?
Lynn did not get her joke at first, and Pauline laughed a little more confidently.
I was robbed by those we were trying to help. The sleeve is just what they had a grip on when they took all the food from me. I got 2 streets in.
Pauline explained. She took off her jacket to look at the damage herself.
I told you we shouldn't have separated.
Lynn was confident that it was all her fault.
Not at all. I'm fine, and the food ultimately went to who we were giving it to in the first place.
Pauline expounded, looking significantly less dazed than when Lynn walked in. Lynn shrugged and accepted her calmer manner. They both readied their small amount of food and supplies for their trip and went to bed for what was likely Lynn's last night in the tiny cottage. As homely as it was, Lynn was already feeling the pull to move on. They were both eager for their new adventure and did not get much sleep. The next day, they set off on foot early in the morning, both ready for their 3-week trek to the main castle. Camping soon lost its charm, and the 2 girls would catch themselves complaining about a few things here and there. At one point, they were bickering when someone on a large horse-like creature pulling a cart stopped and offered them a ride. They accepted the courtesy, sat on the very back of the cart, and were both thankful for the miles they covered before they disembarked. Lynn and Pauline had to hop off without asking the driver to stop, to not be led astray by his different itinerary. The rest of the way, they encountered nothing but rude drivers and other campers who kept to themselves. Arriving in the royal city was like entering a fairy tale story, with a towering castle on a large hill surrounded by a heavily colonized area. The castle was near the rear of the massive town, one you could see for miles away. This made the last leg of the trip interminable, but they reached the servant gate for the castle at dusk on the day that marked the last of their third week traveling. They were in fairly good shape upon arriving, if a little sweaty and probably smelling to an extent. They were allowed in and were told to wait in the cold hallway where the benches were made of stone. After 2 hours, someone came rushing into the hallway, making plenty of noise that echoed off the bare walls. The lavish man halted in front of the two women, who had both managed to clean themselves up a bit. A lot of what the man perceived were enchantments Lynn placed on their necklaces. The effects gave them a soft and younger look, accenting their features as light makeup would do, and making stray hairs invisible to give their hair a smoother appearance.
Yeah, I got the time.
The man snapped at the two of them, and they both stood up. He pointed to himself and began to march back down the hallway. The girls followed and came to the end of the hallway after a long, silent, and awkward walk. They entered a large kitchen that was also mostly made of stone. Rustic cooking apparatuses were meticulously organized along the opposing wall, and shelves covered the remaining walls of the room. Lynn loved the charm it gave off and was excited to figure out how to work the equipment.
You will cook with those things in front of you. Make something I like, and I will grant you the cooking duty you want. If not, I need a dishwasher and a few chamber pot maids.
The man sat down and looked at them expectantly. Both girls looked at each other, took off their bags, and placed them side to side. They immediately started to discuss the matter at hand, but were cut off abruptly.
No talking. I need to know what you both can do. Also, no cooking anything the same way. No mimicking.
They went about their work silently and quickly. The ingredients were new to Lynn, and none, other than the meat, were what they had worked with previously. Lynn picked up an oddly shaped gourd and rapped her knuckles on the surface, listening. There was a small, hollow sound. She felt confident the inside was soft, so she cut at the top and exposed the soft insides. Digging everything out like she would a small pumpkin, she examined the insides and smelled them. She assumed they were edible, and she left the contents there to start the fires in her oven. Magic was not known here, so when Lynn spoke enchantments to regulate both temperatures in the old stove, no one paid her any mind. Lynn separated the seeds from the guts of the gourd, washed them, and spread them out to dry. Returning to the soft mixture, she moved it to a bowl and rubbed the gourd with an oil she found and liked the smell of, then placed the shell in the oven to begin cooking. She wafted in all of the spices available to choose from, and only selected the ones that seemed familiar to her. Putting a smaller amount of a larger assortment of spices in the concoction, she finally moved to the meat provided. Cutting the meat into fine slices, she folded them into the stuffing of spices and gourd guts. She chopped a few more ingredients, added them, and combined with her hands. Lynn then removed the shell from the oven and placed it on the clean and prepped stone countertop. Placing the insides back into the hot gourd, she then quickly returned the entire dish into the oven. After a short rest, when she cleaned her surroundings a bit and cooled off, she took a clean cloth and patted the seeds till they were completely dry. She scattered them across a flat cooking stone, placed them in the oven, and with a short enchantment, she began cooking them at a lower temperature. Presentation is the best way to win over any judge when it comes to cooking. If you know what you are doing, you will cook well enough as far as taste is concerned, but you must make it look appealing to food critics to really win them over. Lynn's biggest fear was that some part of the food was not edible. She could not really see Pauline from her station and tried not to look in her direction after their first correction. When Lynn started to smell a slight burning, she rushed over to her oven and looked in on her meal. The outside skin of the squash had crisped up and was just now starting to turn black in some small spots. Lynn applauded her good sense as she pulled out her dish and set it out to cool. A brilliant array of scents filled the room. Moments later, the room was filled with a completely different aroma, and Lynn realized the burning she had noticed before was not from the perfectly crisp skin of her creation, but rather the very burnt product that Pauline produced. The acrid smell clouded the room, making the man cough while he watched Pauline slowly crumble under the pressure of the test. When Lynn was told to bring her dish to him, she retrieved the seeds and presented them in a small container. The man immediately dumped the toasted seeds into the shell and began to eat. He ate from every part of the dish, and Lynn was satisfied the entire plant was safe to eat. She casted an enchantment to remove the burnt smell from the room completely. Lynn turned to Pauline and gave her a sympathetic look. She almost laughed when she tried to fake a frown. The crispy outer layer of the vegetable crumbled under the pressure, yet sustained its crispy texture. The insides maintained their integrity and had not turned into soup. The sight made both the girls' stomachs growl, but they waited patiently for him to finish his dinner.
I'm not eating that,
the judge said, pointing at Pauline's melted entree once he had eaten Lynn's entire presentation. Lynn tried not to laugh nervously because she was now scared they would be separated.
I respect that, sir.
Pauline spoke quickly.
All right, well, your area is perfectly clean, and you are clearly a brilliant chef. You, Burn Girl, my new dishwasher. You, Blue, are a chef, clearly. You start now. Share the room out the door there, down 4 doors on the left. You will be called on if we need you between now and 4 in the morning when you and the other cooks start breakfast.
With that, the man left the room. The girls both laughed.
I think that's for the best. Lucky break.
Pauline stuck her finger into the food to see if it was too hot to throw away.
Lucky indeed. What did you do to that poor dish there?
Lynn asked, genuinely curious.
I took the guts and wrapped them around the whole piece of meat and other ingredients.
Pauline sighed and slowly slid her dish over to the trash can at the edge of the counter till it fell in.
Are you not gonna wash that dish?
Lynn joked.
No, there's no saving it. I'll even replace it, personally.
Pauline looked in the trash to make sure it was not going to smoke and that she was safe to leave it alone.
How did you know every part of the gourd was edible? Because that is rarely the case with the food I know.
Pauline questioned to distract them from her melted dish.
I didn't. I put the seeds off to the side just in case.
Lynn explained with a gesture to the small dish they were presented in.
What would you have done if he still claimed you tried to poison him with some part?
Pauline pressed on as she began to clean Lynn's side of the kitchen.
That it was there for the smell. We got lucky. That's all that matters.
With that, the girls went to find their room. To no one's surprise, there were 2 other women in the room. Both were wide awake, so they entered into good introductions before everyone went to bed. The next day, it was rather easy to fall into the routine and into step with the workers who were already there. Despite some organization issues, they were already very efficient, so Lynn and Pauline both found their roles to be more about fitting in rather than running or leading. They listened well and did what was asked of them every time.
Today, the prince was struggling with his alphabet, and it kinda helped him.
This was the first act of kindness displayed since their arrival. They were after the true nature of the royal family, so this was the first big breakthrough they had. Pauline continued to teach the young prince in private. The culture of receiving help was so bad in this society that the prince hid the lessons under the guise of direct tasks asked of the dishmaid. They learned that the young prince was exceedingly kind to Pauline in private, as she was to him earnestly. This was not a trait any of them had encountered elsewhere in the castle for the first 6 months' time.
Here, I think both of you should have something for working so hard. Thanks for 6 months of help.
Their roommates gave them each a new apron to replace the cheap, stained ones they had to use from the castle. The gesture was graciously received, and even a few smiles were exchanged for the first time. This was never spoken of by anyone in the next few months, but it did get a little easier to coexist with those around them slowly. By this point, the prince was considered a prodigy for the level of intelligence at as young of an age as he was. The 10-year-old secret was merely a good, private, and kind teacher. The room became a home over the weeks, and everyone fully respected their own space and kept it clean. They maintained boundaries, and anything within those boundaries unconditionally. This is when the second royal family member, a cousin, was caught by Lynn being kind. A small nervous servant spilled an inconsequential amount of something on a complicated-looking dress the noble was wearing. She collapsed in anticipation of being scorned. But instead, the noble girl looked back and forth, and not seeing Lynn around the corner, she tore the stained portion of her dress off and handed it to the anxious servant. "No one will know now. Hurry along, please." The noble spoke low, and Lynn would not have heard the words if she were not always equipped with enchantments of useful manner, like amplifying sound on demand. Lynn was sure to let the hallway clear before she brought the news to Pauline. They continued to delve deeper into the royal family and found a lot of evidence of cruel crimes, but they always traced them back to a select handful of people rather than the entire family. Lynn also realized the meanest nobles were the most powerful and highest ranking. These were the ones she only came to know because she would present what she cooked for them and would have to remain through the meal so she could be killed if the royal was poisoned. Lynn happily presented most of the meals because she could not die. She feared little anymore, not even solitude, and had faced many challenging obstacles. Still, she lives on to forget things eventually, unless recorded magically. Years ended up passing, and Pauline had pulled away a little from Lynn, but for good reasons, since she started to see one of the older princes. There were so many that Lynn had no idea which one Pauline was always pointing out in the gaggle of princes and their relatives. Everyone prepared for weeks for a huge birthday bash for one of the more odious older teenager princesses. None of the family ever moved out of the massive castle, yet it was hard to keep track of them, their new wives, and the hordes of children. Pauline grew more stressed the closer the birthday feast got, and Lynn figured out why as it approached. Finally, Pauline showed Lynn a threatening letter from someone in the royal family. It said if she told the prince about it, then she would regret it at the party. The prince she was fraternizing with came upon her as she was reading the letter for the first time and immediately snatched the threatening note. The night of the party was a cold one, and Lynn had to cast a warming spell on the dance hall to keep it warm. She also had to monitor the food on the floor. Pauline was in and out of the kitchen delivering things from the chefs inside, who cooked continuously. Lynn kept an eye out for anything suspicious, and it was not too long before she spotted a yellow glass container in the hand of the birthday girl that she did not have before. She was making her way to Pauline, setting up food on the other side of the room from Lynn. She was not going to make it there before the princess would reach Pauline.
"You are not worthy, maid."
The princess threw the thick glass container at Pauline, and her screams were heard loud enough to silence the music. Pauline's face was burning from acid that had been contained in the glass bottle, and Lynn immediately struck for the princess's face in revenge. Lynn was sure not a single soul in the massive ballroom expected someone to jump at the princess and to roundhouse kick her in the jaw. Lynn was also sure they had never seen a more agile fighting style within any of their lifetimes. The princess's face slammed into the floor like a concrete slab, the momentum dragging her along for a short distance before the noble's body came to a complete stop. A few people laughed at the scene, others were astounded, and some rushed to help the royal. Lynn knew the princess was knocked out cold and would be perfectly fine in a few months, after the broken jaw healed. Both Lynn and Pauline were immediately beaten, dragged into a dungeon cell, and left there for over 2 days before someone brought them any food. Lynn could not escape with the tools she had due to the guards stripping them of everything except their gowns. Pauline healed quickly and was happy that Lynn defended her, though she was terrified of the result of their actions. Pauline spoke about the prince once she could talk comfortably enough, told her how they had done several impressively romantic things, and Lynn was warmed by the positivity she still held for the prince after all of this. Lynn knew she was going to be fine, but did not want anything to happen to her friend. Lynn searched the floor of the dirty cell for anything that might hold an enchantment. She had no luck, and they had to wait. On their 6th day, there was a ruckus in the hallway outside their cell. Lynn positioned herself in front of Pauline in case the guards were taking them to their executions. The person outside their door handled the keys for a while before opening it slowly. A face poked around the door and looked for the women quickly. When they spotted them, a different boy burst into the room. This was the young prince that Pauline had befriended in her time here.
Pauline! We've come to rescue you and your friend!
The boy was excited and pulled both Lynn and Pauline towards the door.
You came for me!
Pauline was clearly smitten with the act, and Lynn had to push her towards the older prince so she could thank him with a hug and a kiss.
We're going deep into the south. I'll be starting a revolt against my cruel family. My eyes are open to the amount of kindness that exists around me. I'm unsure how we got this way.
The young prince sighed deeply and did not move to leave yet.
Well, I can take a guess. Your main temple, where you all go to practice religion, is a wrecked colony spaceship from hundreds of years ago. The tech broke in the crash and your scientists died off before they could record all of their information. Slowly, the intelligence dwindled and the power-hungry took over under the guise of saviors. Not the first isolated society I have been across, but it is by far the most barbaric civilization that I have ever experienced.
Lynn finished resolute, and the princes led them away from the castle where they safely escaped to the south.
Slowly, the intelligence dwindled and the power-hungry took over under the... What is this word?
Guys. Like disguise?
Okay.
Guys.
Guys, got it.
Yeah, so just start over slowly.
Boys.